The morning fog rolled across the manicured lawns of the Harrington estate like a quiet secret, curling around the iron gates and dissolving into nothing before it ever reached the rose gardens that stretched endlessly along the eastern wing. Elena Vasquez had walked through those gates every morning for 2 years, but today felt different. Today, her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat, and the small warm hand gripping 3 of her fingers felt like both an anchor and a reason to be terrified. Lily, 3 years old, dark-eyed and completely silent, walked beside her mother with the careful, deliberate steps of a child who had learned very early that the world could be loud and overwhelming and unpredictable. She didn't cry. She didn't ask questions. She didn't point at the butterflies drifting between the hedgerows, even though Elena watched her daughter's gaze follow them with an intensity that broke her heart every single time. Lily had not spoken a single word in 14 months. Not one. And every specialist Elena had managed to scrape together enough money to see had a different theory, a different label, a different waiting list that stretched 6 months into a future that felt impossibly far away. Elena was 28 years old, and she was exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't fix. She was a single mother, had been since Lily's father walked out 18 months ago, just around the time the silence started, as if the two events were connected by some invisible, cruel thread. She sent money home to her own mother in San Antonio every month, kept a small apartment in the less expensive neighborhood 40 minutes from the Harrington estate, and worked 6 days a week cleaning, organizing, and managing the household of one of the wealthiest men in the country. She had never once brought Lily to work. She understood, without having to be told, that the line between her personal life and her professional obligations was something she was expected to maintain with military precision. Mrs. Patricia, the head of household staff, had made that clear during Elena's very first orientation. "Mr. Harrington values his privacy and his peace," she had said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We are here to make his life seamless. Our own complications are left at the gate." But today, Elena had no choice. Her regular babysitter, sweet, reliable Mrs. Kowalski from the apartment below, had been taken to the hospital at 4 in the morning. A fall. A broken hip. Elena had gotten the call at 4:15, and she had sat on the edge of her bed in the dark, staring at the wall while Lily slept peacefully in the next room, working through her options one by one and finding all of them closed. She couldn't afford to lose a day's pay. She genuinely, mathematically could not. Not with Lily's next specialist appointment coming up in 3 weeks, an out-of-pocket consultation with a developmental pediatrician who had a 6-month waiting list, but had just had a cancellation, and who required a deposit Elena had already put on her credit card. So she had dressed Lily carefully in her best soft lavender dress, packed a small bag with her daughter's favorite quiet things, a worn plush rabbit, a board book about ocean animals, a small container of dry cereal, and a set of smooth wooden shapes that Lily liked to arrange and rearrange for long stretches of time, and she had prayed, silently and desperately, the entire 40-minute bus ride to the estate. Her plan was simple: keep Lily in the staff break room. Mrs. Patricia arrived at 10. Elena started at 7. If she worked quickly, if she was efficient and thorough and invisible in the way she had trained herself to be, maybe she could get through the majority of her responsibilities before anyone with authority appeared. Maybe, just maybe, she could make it through the day without anyone knowing Lily had been there at all. What she had not accounted for was the fact that Ethan Harrington, 33 years old, billionaire tech founder, CEO of Harrington Innovations, and a man so rarely seen in the domestic wings of his own home that the staff sometimes joked he was more myth than employer, was, On this particular Tuesday morning, awake at 6:45 and standing at the kitchen island in a gray t-shirt and sweatpants, nursing a cup of coffee and staring at his laptop with the hollow eyes of a man who had not slept well. Elena pushed open the kitchen door with her back, balancing her supply caddy in both arms, and stopped so suddenly that the caddy rattled. Ethan looked up. They stared at each other. And then Lily, who was still holding Elena's hand because Elena hadn't yet had the presence of mind to let go, stepped forward slightly and looked at the man at the counter with the same quiet, searching intensity she applied to everything in the world that interested her. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Harrington," Elena said immediately, the words tumbling out fast and low. "My babysitter had a medical emergency. I had nowhere. I completely understand if this is a problem. I'll figure something out. I can call." "Is that your daughter?" Ethan asked. His voice was quiet. Not cold, not warm. Just quiet.
"Yes, sir."
"She's 3. She's very well behaved. She won't make any noise. I promise she won't be in any of your spaces. I'll keep her in the break room." "What's her name?" Elena blinked. "Lily." Ethan looked at Lily for a moment. Lily looked back at him, completely unintimidated, her dark eyes steady and serious. Then he looked back at his laptop. "There's orange juice in the refrigerator," he said. "The good kind, not from concentrate. Kids like orange juice." And then he went back to whatever he was reading, as if the entire conversation had already concluded to his satisfaction. Elena stood perfectly still for 3 full seconds, waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the condition or the qualification or the politely worded threat to her employment. None came. She quietly set her caddy down, opened the refrigerator, and poured a small cup of orange juice. She set it on the low coffee table in the adjoining sitting room, the one the staff used when they were on short breaks, and guided Lily toward it. Lily sat down on the rug, picked up her plush rabbit, and held the cup with both hands the way she always did, drinking slowly and seriously. Elena watched her daughter for a moment and felt something in her chest loosen, just slightly, just enough to breathe. She didn't know yet that this morning would change everything. She didn't know that the quiet man at the counter, who had barely looked up from his laptop, had actually watched Lily for a long moment after Elena turned away. She didn't know that something in the child's silent, searching eyes had snagged on something deep inside Ethan Harrington, something he had spent 3 years trying to forget, something that lived in a room on the 3rd floor that no one on the staff had ever been asked to clean.
She didn't know any of that yet.
She just picked up her caddy, took a steadying breath, and went to work. Ethan Harrington had built his empire on the ability to read signals that other people missed. It was the core of everything he had ever created: software that anticipated human behavior, algorithms that detected patterns invisible to the naked eye, technology that listened to what people weren't quite saying and translated it into something useful. Forbes had called him the man who taught machines to understand humans. 3 different magazine profiles had described his mind as architecturally precise. A venture capitalist he'd pitched to at 24, before the first round of funding, before any of it, had told him bluntly, "The problem with you, kid, is that you see too much." He had taken it as a compliment. But there were some things that precision couldn't protect you from. Some signals you could read perfectly and still be powerless against. Ethan knew this the way you only know things that have dismantled you completely, not as theory, not as philosophy, but as scar tissue. He had been 29 when his wife, Claire, was diagnosed. 30 when she began the treatments that made her so sick she could barely lift her head from the pillow. 31 when they sat together in a hospital room in Boston and a doctor used the word palliative in a sentence, and the world rearranged itself permanently. 32 when he stood at a graveside in October rain and understood, with that same architectural precision he applied to everything, that no amount of money or intelligence or careful engineering could build a bridge back to before. Their daughter, Sophie, had been 2 years old when Claire died. She would have been 3 now. She had been with Claire's parents in Connecticut since the funeral, a temporary arrangement that had lasted a year, sustained by Ethan's inability to do what needed to be done, which was to come home, to open the door to the room on the 3rd floor, to be a father in the daily, present, irreversible way that the word actually required. He spoke to Sophie on video calls 3 times a week. He listened to her babble and laugh and hold up drawings. He sent things, books, toys, carefully chosen things. He told himself he was protecting her from his grief, that he needed to be whole before he could be what she needed. He was 33 now, and he was beginning to understand, slowly and painfully, that waiting to be whole might be the cruelest thing he could do to both of them. He had come downstairs this morning because he couldn't sleep again and because the upper floors of the house felt like they were pressing down on him in the particular way they did when the silence became something you could almost hear. He had been sitting with his coffee and a quarterly report he had no intention of actually reading, trying to find his way into the day, when the kitchen door swung open. He had noticed the child immediately, not because she made any noise, but precisely because she didn't. 3-year-olds who were brought into unfamiliar spaces by nervous mothers usually did something. They hid, or they cried, or they pointed at things and asked loudly what they were. This one had done none of those things. She had looked at him with dark, steady eyes that contained a kind of gravity that was startling in someone so small, and then she had simply continued holding her mother's hand, waiting. He thought about Sophie's eyes on the video screen, the way she had started to look at him with a question she didn't yet have words for. After Elena had taken Lily to the sitting room, Ethan sat very still for a while. Then he closed the quarterly report and opened a different window on his laptop, one he had opened several times before and always closed without completing what he'd started. His daughter's enrollment in the local preschool, 40 minutes from the estate. The form had been sitting half-filled for 3 weeks. He stared at it. Down the hall, he could hear nothing, which meant the little girl was still there, still silent, still existing in that remarkable self-contained way. He found, oddly, that the knowledge of her presence made the house feel less like a museum. By 8:30, Elena had completed the main floor and the guest bathrooms and was moving through the library with the quiet efficiency that had made her indispensable for 2 years. She had checked on Lily 4 times, finding her each time precisely where she'd left her, once arranging her wooden shapes in a long, careful line, once studying the board book with focused intensity, once simply sitting with her rabbit in her lap and her hands folded, looking at nothing in particular with an expression that adults who didn't know her sometimes found unsettling and that Elena found utterly heartbreaking, because she understood it was simply the face her daughter made when she was listening to the world. At 8:47, the thing happened that Elena had feared most. Lily left the sitting room. Elena didn't know this immediately. She was in the library, working methodically along the bookshelves, when some instinct made her stop, a mother-specific, calibrated alarm, the one that fires not when your child is loud but when a silence shifts quality. She set down her cloth and walked quickly back to the sitting room. The rug was empty. The rabbit was sitting propped against the edge of the coffee table. The wooden shapes were arranged in a careful line that Lily had clearly not wanted to disturb. Elena's heart seized. She moved quickly through the hall and then stopped. Lily was standing in the entrance to the kitchen, and Ethan Harrington was crouched down, this tall, broad-shouldered man in his worn gray t-shirt, this person whose name appeared on the covers of business magazines, crouched down to her level, looking at her. He wasn't speaking. He was just looking at her. And Lily was looking back. Between them, on the floor, was a single item, a child's drawing, crayon on white paper that had apparently fallen from somewhere or been taken from somewhere, and that Lily was holding loosely in one hand, offering it toward him with the solemnity of someone presenting something very important. Elena recognized it, in the way you recognize something you've never seen before, but understand immediately. The drawing showed a woman with yellow hair and a small figure beside her. Child's work. Clearly old. Clearly precious. She started to move forward, to apologize, to take Lily's hand and redirect her. But Ethan looked up and caught her eye, and something in his face made her stop. He wasn't upset. He wasn't composed in the polite, controlled way of a man tolerating an inconvenience. He looked, she thought. She wasn't sure, because she had never seen him look like this, like someone who had just been handed something they had been quietly desperate for without knowing it. He looked at Lily again. He reached out slowly and gently touched the corner of the drawing, not taking it, just acknowledging it.
She drew this, he said.
Not a question. No, Elena said softly. I think it was already there. I think she found it. He was quiet for a moment. Sophie drew it, he said. My daughter. She left it here last time she visited. I didn't put it away. He paused. I couldn't. The kitchen was very still. Lily continued to hold the drawing out toward him, patient and serious, as if she had all the time in the world. There is a particular kind of language that exists beneath words, beneath the whole elaborate architecture of human speech that adults spend their lives constructing and navigating and sometimes hiding behind. Children live in it naturally, before the words come, before they learn that feelings are supposed to be filtered and translated and made presentable. Most of them forget it when the words arrive. But some children, the quiet ones, the still ones, the ones who watch with those unsettling, searching eyes, seem to carry it with them like a second heartbeat, a frequency that ordinary conversation can't quite drown out. Elena had spent 14 months learning to live in that frequency with her daughter. It had required the dismantling of almost every reflex she had, the instinct to fill silence, to encourage and prompt, to measure progress against developmental charts that felt increasingly beside the point. It had required her to sit with the discomfort of not knowing, to trust that her daughter was present and aware and communicating in ways that didn't fit the standard forms. It had required, more than anything, a kind of love that was not about what she had hoped for, but about who Lily actually was. This was not something anyone had helped Elena understand. She had come to it slowly and painfully and alone, mostly at night, in the small apartment, after Lily was asleep, sitting at the kitchen table with parenting forums on her laptop and silent tears on her face that she refused to call grief because she absolutely knew, that her daughter was not a tragedy. She was a mystery.
She was a frequency.
She was something Elena was still learning to hear. What she was watching now, from the kitchen doorway, was something she could not fully explain, and would spend a long time afterward trying to. Ethan had not taken the drawing back from Lily. He remained crouched at her level, and they seemed to have settled into some form of exchange that involved no words on either side, just the very slight shifts of attention and posture that constituted a conversation between two people who were both, Elena realized, more comfortable with silence than the world gave them credit for. After a moment, Ethan did something unexpected. He reached into the kitchen junk drawer behind him, the one Elena had organized meticulously 6 months ago, and produced a stubby crayon. A red one. He held it out toward Lily. Lily looked at it for 3 seconds. Then she looked at him. Then she took it. She sat down on the kitchen floor, cross-legged, without ceremony. She set the drawing down in front of her, Sophie's drawing of the yellow-haired woman and the small figure, and she made 2 small additions to it, very deliberate, with the red crayon. 2 small shapes, side by side, beneath the existing figures. They might have been flowers or stars, or something else entirely. Then she set the crayon down and looked at what she'd done. Ethan looked at it too. Elena couldn't see his face from where she stood, only the line of his shoulders, the slight bow of his head. She watched him press the back of his hand against his mouth briefly, a gesture she recognized as the physical act of holding something in.
He looked up at her then.
How long has she been? He paused, choosing the word carefully. Quiet. 14 months, Elena said. She walked forward and crouched near her daughter, running a hand gently over Lily's hair. Lily leaned slightly into her, still looking at the drawing. She spoke before. 12 or 15 words. And then she just stopped. The doctors have different theories. We're still working through the evaluations. What do you think? He asked. Not what do the doctors think. What do you think? Elena was quiet for a moment. In 2 years, no one had asked her that question. Not a single specialist, not a single well-meaning friend, not her mother on the phone from San Antonio. They all had frameworks and percentiles and recommendations. None of them had asked her what she thought. I think she's listening, Elena said. I think she heard something when she was 2 that was too big for words, and she decided to go very still until she could figure out how to carry it. I think she's still figuring.
She paused.
Her father left when she was almost 2.
Suddenly,
she witnessed a lot of the difficulty before that. I think she absorbed more than a toddler was supposed to. Ethan was quiet. On the floor between them, Lily began carefully arranging the red crayon parallel to the edge of the drawing, precise and deliberate. Sophie stopped talking for 3 weeks after her mother died, Ethan said. His voice was steady in the way of someone who has rehearsed steadiness. Not completely. A few words. But she went inward. The grief counselor said it was normal, that children process differently. He paused. She started talking again. She's fine now. She's good. She's with her grandparents. The way he said she's good held a fracture in it that the words themselves didn't, a hairline crack between what was true and what he needed to believe. Elena didn't push on it. She understood hairline cracks. She's coming back here soon, he said then, quietly, as if he were telling himself as much as her. I needed to get things ready. The right things. He looked at his kitchen as if seeing it from a different angle. I'm not sure I know what the right things are. Elena looked at her daughter, who had now arranged 3 crayons. A 4th had materialized from somewhere, in a color-ordered row beside the drawing. In my experience, she said, they mostly want to know you're there. The right things are mostly just you showing up, being willing to not have all the answers. The room was quiet. Lily picked up Sophie's drawing very carefully, stood up, and held it out to Ethan again. A second offering. Her dark eyes were steady and serious, and there was something in her expression, something in the small, deliberate act of giving the thing back, that made Elena's throat tighten almost unbearably. Ethan took it this time. He held it carefully in both hands, looking down at it, at Sophie's yellow-haired woman and small figure, and at Lily's 2 small red additions beneath them. He looked at it for a long time. When he finally looked up at Elena, there was something new in his face. Something tired and open and real, the expression of a person who has put down something heavy and hasn't yet decided if they're allowed to. Your daughter is remarkable, he said. I know, Elena said, and smiled, and meant it with her whole heart. By noon, a series of small, unremarkable things had happened that would not have seemed significant to an outside observer, but that Elena would later identify, trying to reconstruct the day in her mind, as the moments when everything began to shift. Mrs. Patricia had arrived at 10 as expected, swept through the main floors with her clipboard and her sharp eyes, and had clearly noticed the small lavender-dressed presence in the sitting room. She had found Elena in the upstairs hallway and delivered a 6-sentence speech about professionalism and liability that Elena had absorbed with a nod, her eyes down, her hands quiet. Elena was good at absorbing things without letting them land on her face. But then, 40 minutes later, Mrs. Patricia had come to find her again, a different quality to her footsteps this time, quicker and uncertain, to report that Mr. Harrington had said, and she quoted him directly, "The child stays. Don't make an issue of it." Mrs. Patricia had delivered this information with the expression of a woman whose entire professional framework had encountered an unexpected variable. She did not make an issue of it. Lily stayed. What Elena did not see, because she was upstairs finishing the guest rooms, was what happened in the study at 11:15. Ethan had closeted himself in there after breakfast with calls and correspondence, doing the work that kept the empire running, the kind of work that required focus and quiet, and an executive assistant named Daniel who had learned years ago to anticipate everything. But at 11:15, Daniel had knocked and informed him that a small person was standing in the hallway outside the study door. Not crying, not knocking, just standing. Lily had apparently concluded, sometime between finishing her cereal and exhausting the entertainment value of the wooden shapes, that the study was interesting. The door was slightly ajar. She stood in the gap of it, looking in with that characteristic focused gravity, her rabbit held loosely at her side. Daniel had come to report this expecting to be told to redirect the child. Instead, Ethan had looked at the doorway for a moment and then said, "See if there's paper in the supply cabinet. Plain white. And the colored pencils, not the markers." Daniel had processed this instruction, retrieved the items, and set them up quietly, efficiently, on the low ottoman in the corner of the study. The one that no one ever sat on, that held a single decorative throw pillow. Lily had come in, settled herself on the floor beside the ottoman, and begun to draw. She had stayed there for 45 minutes. Ethan had stayed on his calls. They had occupied the same space with the comfortable ease of two people who had silently negotiated the terms of coexistence and found them acceptable. Daniel had checked in twice and reported to Mrs. Patricia, in a tone of complete bewilderment, that the CEO of a $14 billion company was sharing his study with a silent 3-year-old, and nobody seemed to find this unusual. When Elena came to collect Lily for lunch, she found her daughter on the study floor surrounded by several drawings, one of which appeared, unmistakably, to be a rabbit, and one of which appeared to be a series of circles that Lily had labeled, with very careful pencil marks, in a way that might have been letters or might have been something she invented. On the desk, a post-it note in Ethan's handwriting read, "She made me 6 drawings. The rabbit is for me." She was very clear about this. Elena stood there for a moment, holding the post-it note, reading it twice. Lily looked up at her with her dark, quiet eyes. "Did you give him a rabbit?" Elena asked softly. Lily held up the remaining drawing, a free-form swirl of purple and blue that was objectively beautiful, and held it toward her mother. "A third offering, this one for Elena." Elena took it. She pressed it briefly against her chest. She did not let herself cry, because she was still at work, but it was a near thing. At 1 o'clock, Ethan came out of the study, called into the kitchen, and made lunch, not something he apparently did with any regularity, judging by Daniel's visible alarm visible from the hallway. He made grilled cheese sandwiches, which he delivered to Elena, who was eating her packed lunch in the break room, on an actual plate with a side of apple slices, because he had checked the refrigerator and determined that these were the components of a reasonable lunch for a child, and by extension apparently for her mother. He said nothing. He set the plate down and returned his calls. Elena stared at the plate, then at the door through which he'd disappeared. Then at Lily, who was already investigating the apple slices with the methodical attention she brought to new foods. Okay, Elena said to herself, very quietly. The afternoon brought its own revelations. Around 3 o'clock, Elena was in the east corridor with her cart when she heard something that stopped her cold, a sound. From the direction of the sitting room. Not a crash, not an emergency. Something soft. A small, high sound. She followed it, moving quickly without running, and found Lily at the sitting room bookshelf, a lower shelf that held some volumes that had clearly been there since the house was decorated, spines uncracked, purely aesthetic. Lily had found something behind a row of them. A thin-board book, bright-covered, tucked behind the decorative volumes as though it had been placed there deliberately, out of sight but not thrown away. A child's board book, about stars. Lily had it open on her lap and was looking at it, and the sound Elena had heard, the sound that had stopped her cold, was Lily making a small noise in the back of her throat. Not a word.
Not yet.
A vocalization, soft and wondering, directed at a picture of a constellation. Elena pressed her back against the wall outside the sitting room doorway and stood there, eyes closed, for 20 seconds, making absolutely no sound, because the worst thing she could think of was startling her daughter out of whatever this was. When she opened her eyes, Ethan was in the hallway 6 feet away, looking at her. He had come from the direction of the study. He'd heard it too. They stood there in silence, looking at each other, the sitting room doorway between them, and from inside came the small, soft, wondering sound again. Lily, studying the stars. Elena's face was doing things she could not control. Ethan looked at her with that same tired, open expression she'd seen in the kitchen, and he said nothing, because there was nothing to say that wasn't obvious, and he seemed to be a man who had learned, somewhere along the way, that the obvious things didn't need saying. He went back to his study. Elena went back to her cart. But they were both different, in some small and permanent way, than they had been that morning. At 4:15, Elena was preparing to finish for the day. She had worked through the full house. Every room except the ones she was never asked to enter, the personal quarters on the 3rd floor that Ethan kept self-managed, the private rooms that the staff knew were off-limits without needing to be told. She was packing her cart, mentally calculating the bus schedule, and looking for Lily, who had been on the sitting room rug 5 minutes ago. The sitting room was empty. The break room was empty. The kitchen, empty. Elena's calm held for approximately 40 seconds before it became something else. She moved through the 1st floor quickly, checking rooms, calling Lily's name in the quiet, controlled voice she used when she needed her daughter to come to her, without startling her. No response. She checked the back garden, the enclosed terrace. Nothing. She was standing at the foot of the main staircase, making herself breathe, when she heard footsteps above. Ethan's. She recognized his pace by now, and then his voice, calm and easy, saying something she couldn't quite catch. She went up. The 2nd floor landing. Empty. The footsteps had come from higher. She looked at the 3rd floor staircase, narrower, tucked at the end of the hall, the door to it always closed. The door was open. Elena climbed. The 3rd floor of the Harrington estate was smaller than the floors below, tucked under the roofline, with lower ceilings and dormer windows that caught the late afternoon light at an angle that made everything look gilded and soft. There were 3 doors. 2 were closed. One was open, and from it came the quality of light, and the sound of Ethan's voice, and Elena followed both. The room was a child's room, or it had been prepared to become one, sometime in the recent past. The furniture was beautiful and careful, a small bed with a wooden frame, a bookshelf populated with new and clearly chosen books, a mobile of silver stars above the window seat. But it also contained the signs of a room that had been interrupted, left in a state of becoming rather than finished. A box half unpacked in the corner, some drawings pinned to a corkboard in a way that still had empty space on it, a child's name written in careful block letters above the bed. Sophie. Lily was sitting on the window seat. She had climbed up there, a feat that had apparently involved the step stool from the adjacent bathroom, and she was sitting with her knees pulled up, looking out at the estate gardens below, at the long golden light of late afternoon falling across the rose beds. She had Sophie's board book about stars in her lap, the one she'd found downstairs. Ethan was standing near the doorway, not crowding her, not approaching. He was just present, the way Elena had learned to be present with Lily, available without demanding. He looked at Elena when she appeared, and his expression said she came up on her own. I followed to make sure she was safe. I didn't want to alarm her. Elena nodded. She took a slow breath. She crossed the room quietly and stood beside the window seat, looking at her daughter. Lily didn't look up from the gardens, but she moved, a small shift, making room, and patted the seat beside her. Elena sat. Lily put the board book in her lap, opened to the page with the constellations, and pointed at one of them. Ursa Minor. The little bear. Bear, Elena said softly. That one is a bear. Lily looked at it. Her mouth moved. No sound came, but her mouth moved. The shape of something. A word or the attempt at one, or the memory of what a word felt like. Elena's hands were very still in her lap. Ethan had come further into the room now, quietly, without being asked, and he sat in the small chair near the bookshelf, the one that was child-sized, absurd for him, his long legs bent at an awkward angle. He didn't acknowledge the absurdity. He just settled into it and looked at the mobile of silver stars turning slowly above them in the draft from the window. Sophie likes stars, he said. Conversationally. Not performing for Lily, just talking, the way you talk when you're in a room with someone, and it feels natural to talk. When she was your age, she used to make me name all of them. I don't actually know most of the names. I made some up. He paused. She didn't know the difference for a while. That was the good part of that plan. Lily looked at him. The ghost of something crossed her face. Not quite a smile, but the preparation for one, the musculature of it. I'm going to bring her home soon, Ethan said. He was still looking at the mobile. She's been at her grandparents' for too long. I've been, he stopped. Started again. I was waiting until I was ready. I've realized that might not be the right strategy. He looked at Elena then, a direct look, a look that contained the full weight of the thing he was saying. She needs her home. That's more important than me being ready. Elena held his gaze. Yes, she said. Simply. It is. The room was quiet. The mobile turned. Outside, a bird moved through the golden air over the rose garden and was gone. And then Lily, who had been watching the mobile and holding the book and sitting in the particular contained stillness that was hers, opened her mouth. A sound came.
Small.
Rough with disuse. Tentative in the way of something being tested after a long time, the way you test a step you're not sure will hold your weight. One syllable.
Clear.
Star, said Lily. The word fell into the room like something dropped from a great height, and Elena's vision blurred completely, and she pressed both hands over her mouth, and she made a sound that was not a word at all but contained everything she had felt for 14 months. All of it. The fear and the love and the exhaustion and the hope she had refused to extinguish. All of it compressed into a single involuntary sound that came from somewhere below language. She gathered Lily against her. Lily allowed it, leaning into her with the easy weight of a child who has always known she is safe, whatever else is uncertain. When Elena looked up, Ethan had his elbow on his knee and his hand over his eyes. His shoulders were very still in the way of someone exercising careful control. "Star," Lily said again. More certain this time. Testing the weight of it, finding it holds. Elena laughed, or cried, or both, because there is a sound that is both at once. And that was the sound she made, there in the room with the silver mobile and the little bear constellation, and a 3-year-old who had decided, on a Tuesday afternoon in a stranger's house, that the world was safe enough to speak in again. 3 months after that Tuesday, Elena was called into the small sitting room off the main hallway. Not the break room, the nice one, the one with the good afternoon light, by Ethan's executive assistant Daniel, who had the demeanor of a man delivering a message he found professionally unprecedented, but personally quite touching. Ethan was already there, standing at the window. Sophie was there too. Sophie Harrington was 3 years old, and the precise image of her mother from the photographs Elena had seen in the estate, with soft amber hair and her father's serious eyes and a complete inability to remain still for longer than 45 consecutive seconds. She had come home to the estate 6 weeks after the Tuesday, when Ethan had driven to Connecticut and collected her grandparents' tearful blessing and his daughter's complete lack of ceremony about the matter. She had, apparently, simply gotten in the car and asked if they were going home now. Yes, he had said. We're going home. She was now in the process of explaining to Elena, with great authority and some urgency, that the best way to see the Ursa Minor constellation from the 3rd-floor window seat was to turn off all the lights, and had Elena seen the flashlight, because the flashlight was important for seeing constellations even though Daddy said that was not how flashlights worked. "Sophia," Ethan said. "Sophie," she corrected him, with the severity of a person who has had this conversation many times and remains baffled by the resistance.
Sophie.
Let Elena sit down. Sophie evaluated this. Okay, but can she come to the window later? Yes. Okay. Sophie went to the bookshelf, where she had left 3 board books open face down in a way that suggested she had opinions about multiple things simultaneously, and began consulting them. Elena sat across from Ethan, and Ethan sat down, and he told her what he wanted to tell her. He had been consulting with the Pediatric Developmental Center at Johns Hopkins. He said this carefully, watching her face, clearly prepared for her to object or feel overstepped, and they had a program, a comprehensive evaluation and therapeutic support program, that was exceptional and had space available, and that he would very much like to fund entirely for Lily if Elena would allow it. He also had a referral from the same center to a speech and language pathologist whose approach to selectively mute and late-talking children had outcomes that the literature supported with unusual consistency. Monthly appointments covered. Completely. And the third thing, delivered with the least ceremony and the most weight, he was restructuring his household arrangement. He needed someone who could be present consistently, someone with flexibility and care, and the kind of judgment he had now seen exercised daily for 3 months, to serve in an expanded role that included both household management and assisting with Sophie's schedule and needs during his frequent travel periods. The compensation was, and here he named a number that made Elena go very still and do the mental arithmetic twice to make sure she had heard correctly. He had also spoken with his estate attorney about a rental arrangement. There was a cottage on the grounds, the smaller building near the east garden currently used for storage, that could be made livable. If Elena wanted it. For her and Lily. No obligation, entirely separate. She could decline without any effect on the employment arrangement, but the offer was there. When he finished, the room was quiet. Sophie was making a sound from the bookshelf that might have been singing. Why? Elena asked. She didn't mean it combatively. She meant it the way you ask questions that you need the honest answer to. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Your daughter said a word, he said, in a room that I hadn't been able to make myself go into for a year. She said it because she felt safe, I think, because you had made her into a person who could feel safe in new places. And something about that, he paused. I don't know entirely how to explain it, but she reminded me that the room was supposed to be for living in, not for preserving. Sophie had come away from the bookshelf and was now leaning against her father's arm, studying Elena with open curiosity. Do you have a little girl? Sophie asked. I do, Elena said. Her name is Lily. Sophie processed this. Does she like stars? Elena's throat was tight. She does. Sophie nodded, satisfied, with the certainty of someone who has identified a compatible variable. Okay. She can come see the mobile. She turned to her father. Daddy, can Lily come see the mobile? Yes, Ethan said. I think Lily would love the mobile. Sophie accepted this and returned to her books. Elena looked at this man, 33 years old, architect of things, builder of systems, father who had learned the hard way that grief is not a problem to engineer past, and she understood that what was being offered was not charity. It was not pity. It was the specific, deliberate act of someone who had been reminded by a silent child that connection is the point, that showing up is the point, that the rooms we keep closed out of grief eventually need to be opened and lived in again. She thought about Lily, who was at Mrs. Kowalski's this morning, recovered, hearty, and completely devoted to her small charge, and about the way her daughter had said star 16 more times in the week after that Tuesday, and then rabbit, and then mama again, clear and sure, the way she'd said it before everything went quiet. About how the speech pathologist Elena had finally gotten in to see had described Lily as a child with enormous latent language who was, in his clinical estimation, on the verge of something. About how Lily woke up talking now, not sentences, not yet, but words, careful and chosen and real. She thought about the word home and what it meant when you had spent years making do with the temporary version of things. Yes, Elena said. I accept. All of it. Thank you. Ethan nodded once. He didn't make it bigger than it needed to be. She appreciated that. Sophie, he said, will you show Elena the star chart you made? She hasn't seen it. Sophie required no further invitation. She brought the chart, a large piece of paper covered in crayon stars of varying sizes and enthusiasm, some labeled with real constellation names and some with names that were clearly invented, the Great Sandwich featuring prominently in the lower left quadrant, and spread it on the table between them and began to explain it in great detail. Elena listened and laughed and asked questions and felt something settle in her chest like a key turning in a lock that has been stiff for a very long time. Outside the sitting room window, the October light was falling golden across the rose gardens, the same way it had fallen the afternoon Lily sat on the window seat and spoke her first word back into the world. The mobile of silver stars was turning somewhere above them, on the third floor, in a room that was lived in now. In 6 weeks, Lily would stand in Sophie's doorway and say, in the careful, deliberate voice of a child who has learned that words are worth the effort, "Hi." And Sophie would say, "Hi. Do you want to see the mobile?" And Lily would say, "Star." And Sophie would say, I know. Come on. And they would go up together. But that was still ahead. Right now, in the afternoon light, Sophie was explaining the constellation she had named the running dog, pointing to it with great seriousness, and Elena was nodding and Ethan was watching his daughter with the open, unhidden expression of a man who has found his way back to the room he thought he'd lost, and somewhere across town, a 3-year-old named Lily was arranging smooth wooden shapes on a rug and listening to the world with patient, searching attention, ready. So very nearly ready.
To speak.
Some silences, after all, are not absences. They are the pause before the word that changes everything.